Thank you, and good evening again, everyone. Welcome to our final panel for day 2 as we continue Governance Week 2026, Governance in a Volatile World. And what a great job we've had all previous panelists do on this theme. We just completed the panel, Risk, Regulation and Reputation, Navigating Uncertainty in Modern Corporations, and we had really excellent contributions. Gail, Alex Solomon, Shelley Ben, and Ian John for that topic. Now, I know that this next topic is also going to be one that is extremely engaging. We move to the Future Ready Board, Strategy, Innovation, and Oversight in Disruptive Markets. We have 3 panelists, Marsha Caballero, Chief Executive Officer for ICAT in Trinidad and Tobago, Marlon Yarde from Barbados, and Aleema Mohammed, also from Trinidad and Tobago. But I'd leave their introduction to our very charming moderator, who I will introduce and then hand over today's panel to her. So if we can spotlight Avia Lindie in her beautiful, brilliant red. Good evening, Avia.
Good evening, Camilla.
Avia Lindie is a strategic business development specialist, empowerment, life coach, and motivational speaker who works with goal-oriented, high achievers and organizations to maximize their potential. As a seasoned business executive with over 25 years in leadership, she has successfully created cross-functional teams and mentored and empowered hundreds of individuals to leverage their superpowers to unleash their potential. She's the founder and CEO of Evolve Business Solutions, Inc., focusing on maximizing talent in human capital by offering coaching, mentoring, training, and business development support services. In addition, Avia launched a collection by Avia Maria, an e-commerce lifestyle brand, in 2020. Avia, of course, is a former director here at CCGI, having served our board for 6 years. So we are very, very pleased to have her commitment here at CCGI. And it is with pleasure, Avia, that I hand over today's panel to you.
Thank you so much, Camilla. You are so kind, and you had me blushing. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to moderate this afternoon's panel, and for you to be here, all 42 of you to be here for the entire day. That speaks to your commitment, your love for corporate governance, and also for leaving a legacy for the generation to come. So Kamala has already highlighted what our topic is going to be this afternoon. And we're looking at the private sector, and our panel 3 discussion is going to be focused on the Future Ready Board, Strategy, Innovation, and Oversight in Disruptive Markets. And I can tell you, we have a fantastic lineup of subject matter experts. So let me start with, in a world where disruption is no longer an exception, but the operating environment, the real test of governance is whether boards can move from oversight to foresight and from caution to courageous disciplined action. I'll now introduce our 3 panelists. And after I introduce them, I'll allow them to speak in the same order in which I introduced them. You'll have about 7 minutes to speak. So you'll save your questions, your comments, your sentiments for the Q&A section. And we would love to have today go out with a bang. So I'd love for you to be very interactive. Okay, we're not in a lecture. We're having an interactive discussion, and we want to learn from each other. So let me start with Marsha Caballero. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And you just visited Guyana, and you said some glowing things about Guyana, which I do appreciate. We're going to make you our brand ambassador. So she's the CEO of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago, which is ICAT, over 20 years in executive leadership across strategy, governance, and brand. At ICAT, she drives the Institute's agenda on ethics, sustainability, and digital transformation. while strengthening ties with regional and global governance. If you want to know more about this amazing subject matter expert, the information, her full bio is in the event package. So we're moving on to Marlon Yarde, Managing Director and CEO of the Barbados Stock Exchange Group, and he's been there since 2003. He's led major milestones, including the exchange's demutualization and launch of International Securities Market, a Chartered Accountant and Chartered Governance Professional Fellow, Chartered Governance Institute of London, and former CCGI Director. Welcome. And finally, we have Aleema Mohammed, Corporate Secretary of Bourse Securities, I hope I pronounced it correctly, over 50 years advising boards and senior executives across the Caribbean on governance, regulatory compliance, and enterprise risk. With deep expertise spanning securities regulation, AML, and CFT, and board effectiveness. She's a fellow of the ACCA, FCCA, and CCGI member. All three of our subject matter experts sit at the intersection of governance and market infrastructure. Regulating the profession is Marsha, running the exchange is Marlon, and advising the boards operating within it, Aleema, which sets up our natural conversation on oversight to keep pace with disruption. So we'll start our presentation off with Marsha. She'll have 7 minutes and we'll follow her. She'll follow up with Marlon, and then we'll move to Aleema. Take it away, Marsha.
Thanks so much, Avia. And again, I'm always grateful to be part of the forward-looking conversations that the CCGI always embarks upon. And this is a timely conversation when you look at future-ready boards dealing with strategy, innovation, and oversight, and what is required. And I'll start the conversation by saying, we do live in a volatile world. We all know that. I don't think we need to rehash what the volatility includes, which is geopolitical issues, technology, sustainability or climate concerns, and a number of external factors that affect both business and economy, right? But the thing is, for businesses with boards, the question is, how do boards evolve to ensure that they can, and I don't want even to use the word manage, because I think boards have been managing. And what managing means is that boards have been looking at reports, they have been looking at numbers. But the real question here is, how are they being forward-looking? How are they looking at the future in a way that requires us to be more agile as board members, to ensure that the company is more agile in its response, and to ensure that it has the right resources. And I say resources, meaning even on the board, to, and let me find the right words here, to pivot in this volatile world. So, I've been on a number of boards, and what we're seeing, and even myself doing a fantastic course, I have to give a plug here to Kamala and her team, and a course on governance. And what we're seeing is that the boards continue, especially boards, and forgive me for saying those that have been selected from the political realm, that those boards continue to be boards that do not seem to focus on looking at the future. They're steeped in reports, they're steeped in just getting the information from management, when boards have to be more strategic. And what does that strategy look like? And how is that strategic oversight impacted on the organization? I just want to say a quick few things. That instead of looking at reviewing reports, we should be looking ahead. Instead of we must be moving beyond compliance to become strategic partners that anticipate disruption. And I want to use that word again, anticipate disruption, challenge assumptions, and help position organizations for long-term success, especially in a volatile world, which means that the information being presented to you, you must question in terms of governance. And I'm saying boards because boards are the governance oversight of an organization. Management is the operational aspect, and they bring the information to the board to provide that oversight, to provide that strategic look into the future and to give guidance to management. And then the third part is that boards' roles should no longer ask, did we perform? We must increasingly ask, are we prepared for what's next? And that's where we start setting the stage for what we call a forward-looking view. That's when you start looking at your strategy, being more innovative, and where the oversight becomes one that adds even more fundamental value to the organization's success. You know, one of the things I think that strong boards do, and let me say it this way, sometimes we believe that governance in all of its perimeters and all of its rules and regulations. I mean, I'm coming from ICAT, where we have a very robust rules and regulations document, but that does not take away from the ingenuity and the strategic determination of what we call our border council and management. And so sometimes we think that strong governance stifles ingenuity and stifles innovation, but it does not. The power of strong governance is that it provides discipline, accountability, and a robust risk framework that allows the organizations to innovate confidently. And that's what we want when we think of how are we pivoting as boards. So, for me, the critical thing for any structure of a future-ready board is really and truly, how are we putting the resources in place? And so I guess the next question there, which I know my colleagues on the panel will talk about, is what are the resources required to be able to make that pivot? What are the key resources that we need to be looking at now that we are trying to be more forward-looking in terms of our boards? And I'm going to add here that, and of course, we all have some notes. I'm sure my colleagues have the same. And let's take AI, for example, one of the most disruptive, probably for all of us, in our businesses. And the question is, and I've said this before on a previous panel, the question is not if AI is going to have an impact. The question is, what are we putting in place? Are we looking at the risk perimeters? And how are we being forward, future-looking to be considering the AI implications for our business and for our personnel? I'm a big believer, and especially even at ICAT, we're looking at what does a future-ready organization look like? And we're all talking now about 2035. We're talking about the mega trends. We're talking about what those trends are and how we should be preparing ourselves. And that is where the board, or that is where the organization now has to pivot. When we're not looking at tomorrow. We're not even looking 5 years again. We're now looking at 2035. Almost 10 years later, what is it that the organization is going to be? And therefore, what is the governance framework, the innovation structure? How are we creating or enhancing innovation in our organizations? How are we looking at risk perimeters? And what is the oversight required by the board to be able to push that forward? I didn't come with a full presentation. I know that Avia gave us 7 minutes, but I think for myself, the conversations that we will have among ourselves as panelists, inclusive of the questions that you will ask as participants, will drive an even more robust conversation. So Avia, if you don't mind, I'm not even sure, it might have been 4 or 5 minutes that I've been speaking, but I'd like to still, let the conversation flow, and to stop by saying that, my opening is that the boards have to pivot, and they must pivot so that we can, I want to say be successful, even more successful. And what does that pivot look like? It means that the boards now have to stop looking at reports, but to have greater oversight, now be more involved in strategy, be more involved in driving conversations and supporting management. And therefore, the next stage of that pivot means that the board resources, the people who are on those boards, now need to be of a certain skill set. And I want to leave that open so that my colleagues on the panel could probably start, and so we let the conversation continue. And so I think it would say over to the next one.
No, thank you, Marsha. I think you've set, we're building a nice building here, and you've set a wonderful foundation for where this discussion is going to lead. So let's bring Marlon in, and so that he can add or build to what you've started as we move the conversation along. Go ahead, Marlon.
Thank you very much. Marsha, don't worry, I'll use your extra 3 minutes that you left off. I was told it was a 10-minute presentation beforehand, but I'll take your 3 minutes that you left for me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the organizers, Kamala in particular, for the invitation to participate in this panel on the Future Ready Board, Strategy, Innovation, and Oversight in Disruptive Markets, within the broader theme of governance in a volatile world. That theme is very appropriate because volatility is no longer an interruption to normal business. Volatility is now part of normal business. We often speak as though disruption happens suddenly. In truth, disruption usually builds slowly, then appears suddenly. The warning signs are often there, but institutions sometimes fail to act because the old model is still producing some results. That, for me, is one of the great governance challenges of our time. The real test of a future-ready board is not whether it can respond after a crisis has arrived. The real test is whether it can see the small signals early enough, ask the uncomfortable questions early enough, and help management create options before the organization runs out of room to maneuver. From my perspective, and I'm going to speak my perspective from as being the managing director of the stock exchange. So you'll see me focusing more on capital markets in the region and my own capital markets here to highlight my points. I can only talk about what I know. I will frame my remarks around 4 main points. The first is this: boards must govern relevance, not only performance. Most boards are accustomed to reviewing performance, financial results, budgets, risk reports, compliance matters, strategic plans, and management updates, all of which are very necessary. But in disruptive markets, performance can sometimes mislead us. An organization may still be profitable, but becoming less relevant. It may still be compliant, but losing strategic ground. It may still be respected, but failing to attract the next generation of customers, investors, employees, or issuers. That is a real issue for capital markets in small economies. The stock exchange may have sound rules, proper procedures, capable people, and a respected history. But the deeper question is this: is the market still relevant to the financing needs of the economy? Are companies looking to the market as a serious option for growth capital? Are ordinary citizens seeing the market as a way to participate in creating wealth for themselves and their families? Are young professionals, entrepreneurs, and innovators seeing the capital markets as something that belongs to them? These are not merely operational questions. They are governance questions. A future-ready board must therefore ask not only how did we perform this year, but also, are we becoming more relevant to the future we claim to be preparing for? The second point is that small markets should not think of themselves only as limited markets. They should also think of themselves as test markets. In the Caribbean, we often focus, understandably, on our constraints: small populations, limited liquidity, concentrated ownership, narrow talent pools, high compliance costs, and competition from larger jurisdictions. Those realities are real, but smallness can also be an advantage if we approach it differently. Small markets can move faster. They can convene stakeholders more easily. Regulators, exchanges, listed companies, intermediaries, government, and professional bodies are close enough to speak to each other directly. That is not a weakness. It can be a strategic advantage. The question is whether we use the closeness merely to discuss problems or whether we use it to solve them. If we want more companies to list, we cannot simply wait until they are ready. We must help build a pipeline by working earlier with SMEs, family-owned businesses, and growth companies to improve governance, financial reporting, investor readiness, and understanding of the market. If we want more investors, we cannot simply publish notices and assume people will participate. We must build confidence, financial literacy, and trust. If we want more regional capital market activity, we cannot only speak about integration as an aspiration. We must address the practical issues: regulation, settlement, disclosure, investor access, technology, and mutual recognition. So one of the challenges in our industry is not simply that our markets are small. It is that we sometimes govern them as though smallness is a permanent excuse, rather than a reason to be more deliberate, innovative, and collaborative. Future-ready boards in the Caribbean must therefore ask, what can we do because we are small that larger markets may find harder to do? The third point is that technology is not the strategy. Technology is a pressure test of the strategy. Every board today hears about artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, digital transformation, automation, data, tokenization, and new financial technologies. These matters are important, and boards must take them seriously. But I do not believe boards should begin by asking, what is our AI strategy, or what is our digital strategy? The better question is, what problem are we trying to solve, and for whom? Are we trying to reduce friction for investors, make it easier for companies to raise capital, improve transparency, reduce settlement risks, reach younger participants in the market? Technology should be judged by whether it helps solve real problems. Otherwise, we risk confusing motion with progress. For a capital market institution, digital transformation cannot simply mean acquiring new systems. It must mean creating a market that's easier to access, easier to understand, safer to use, and more trusted. At the same time, the risks are real. Cybersecurity is not just an IT risk, it is a market confidence risk. Data governance is not just a technical matter, it is a trust matter. Artificial intelligence is just not an efficiency tool. It raises questions about accuracy, accountability, bias, transparency, and control. A future-ready board does not need every director to be a technologist, but the board must have enough understanding to ask clear, practical questions. What are we automating? Who remains accountable? What could go wrong? How would we know? How quickly could we recover? And perhaps most importantly, what should never be left entirely to the machine? In a world of increasing automation, boards must be clear about where human judgments remain essential. The fourth point is that long-term success depends on trust, and trust is built before it is needed. In capital markets, trust is everything. Investors participate when they believe the market is fair. Companies list when they believe the market has value. Regulators support innovation when they believe institutions are responsible. Employees commit to change when they believe leadership is credible. The public supports market development when it believes the system is not reserved for a select few. But trust cannot be manufactured during a crisis. It must be built in advance through consistency, transparency, competence, and accountability. This is where governance becomes practical. Governance is not simply board papers, committee charters, and minutes. Those things matter, but they are not the whole story. Governance is how an institution earns permission to innovate. If a market institution has weak governance, innovation will be viewed with suspicion. If it has strong governance, innovation becomes more credible because stakeholders believe there's discipline behind the ambition. That is why governance is in a volatile world should not be interpreted defensively. It should not mean that boards simply slow things down, avoid risks, and protect the status quo. Good governance should create the confidence to move forward responsibly. It should help boards distinguish between reckless risks and necessary risks. It should help institutions modernize without compromising integrity. In our region, this is especially important. We need capital markets that can help finance growth, support entrepreneurship, widen ownership, mobilize savings, and contribute to the national and regional development. But that will not happen by regulation alone, or technology alone, or for that matter, speeches alone. It will require boards that understand their role differently. Boards must be builders of optionality. And by that, I mean boards must ensure that the organization is not trapped with only one path, one model, one source of revenue, one type of customer, one way of operating, or one view of the future. A future-ready board asks, what options are we creating today that will give the organization room to move forward tomorrow? Are we building new capabilities? Are we preparing for the next generation of leaders? Are we investing in systems that can scale? And scaling is important. We have to be able to grow quickly. Are we deepening partnerships? Are we willing to stop doing things that no longer serve the future? Those questions are simple, but they are not always easy. They require courage, because sometimes the board must challenge a model that has worked in the past. They require humility, because no board has all the answers. They require curiosity, because the next source of disruption may not come from a traditional competitor. And they require discipline, because innovation without execution is merely conversation. In closing, I would say this: a future-ready board is not a board that predicts the future. None of us can do that. It is a board that refuses to be surprised by the obvious. It is a board that pays attention to weak signals. It is a board that governs relevance, not only performance. It is a board that treats smallness not only as a constraint, but as an opportunity for agility. It is a board that sees technology as the strategy, but not as a tool to solve real problems. It is a board that understands that trust is a real infrastructure on which markets are built. And it is a board that helps organizations to create options before circumstances force them to make decisions. For me, that is the essence of governance in a volatile world. It's not about standing still in the name of prudence. It's about moving forward with clarity, discipline, imagination, and trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlon. I must say, we're looking forward to hearing more about a future-ready board that is a builder of optionality. I thought that was quite instructive and powerful in your presentation. Let's move on to Aleema Mohammed. And if you're just joining us, we're in panel day 2 of Governance Week, Governance in a Volatile World. Day 2 is focused on governance of the private sector. And our third panel to close out today is speaking to the Future Ready Board, Strategy, Innovation, and Oversight in a Disruptive Market. And we have our third panelist, Aleema, who's going to give her presentation before we move into our discussion and question and answer segment. Take it away, Aleema. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much, Avia. Good afternoon, fellow panelists, and of course, all of the participants on today's session. At the end of the day, at the very last, on day 2, thank you to Kamla and to the CCGI for the kind invitation to speak today. It is my pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of my perspectives on these significant governance areas, which, as we see, continue to evolve. So when I thought about the theme for this afternoon's discussion, the areas strategy, innovation, oversight, and disruptive markets, and when it referred to the future-ready boards, I said to myself, Aleema, this clearly the future is now, because a lot of what we're talking about is what we need to have in place now when I look at my boardroom. So I think many of the speakers have said it, disruption isn't new in any way at this stage in our lives. And I think Colin might have mentioned over the last couple of days that boards cannot predict every issue that can arise. However, they can seek to build a resilient organization that can persevere right throughout whatever storm. So just thinking back, as far as maybe my recollection can take me, we've had several significant events over the last couple of years, starting with maybe, again, my view, the 2008 financial crisis, which impacted markets, valuations, new reporting standards were born out of that event. 2010 coming forward, rapid introduction and implementation of AML/CFT requirements for the financial institutions within the Caribbean. Coming forward, 2012, in the securities area, we had a lot of legislative changes with the Securities Act. 2014, we were talking about FATCA. How are we going to do that? How could we possibly implement something like that? But it's here, it's operating, it's working, right? We had ESG coming into the Caribbean. 2020, COVID-19 pandemic. 2021, Russia-Ukraine war. 2022, AI revolution coming at us. Last year, impact of tariffs on the global market, thanks to, the president of the United States. And then recently, looking at the news again, Ebola back on the table. So we have no shortage of disruptions, I would say. And it's a difficult time to be a director on a board, I would say, quite frankly. But all of that to concur with, I think, what previous speakers have said, that the new, not so new normal is that of constant change. And looking at the areas this afternoon of strategy, innovation, and oversight, I believe that they act as interdependent pillars, where strategy determines where the organization is going. The innovation determines how it will remain competitive, how will we best achieve our goals, and oversight ensures that both strategy and innovation are pursued responsibly and sustainably. It can be likened to a ship sailing across the ocean. Strategy determines our destination. Innovation determines how we navigate the journey, whether with new technology, more efficient routes, better ways of operating. Oversight ensures we stay on course, we monitor the weather, we avoid hazards, and we arrive where we need to get to safely. Without strategy, the ship has no destination. Without innovation, it may never reach its destination effectively or efficiently. And without oversight, it risks drifting off course or running aground. Now, we had lots of examples of disruption. I know Claire's presentation yesterday also gave us, quite a fair amount as well. And I think all of the other presenters said it in different ways. Disruption could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing, right? It all depends on the organization's outlook and its perspective. The ability to harness innovation and strategy for success. Is it easy? I think the other presenters said it. No, it's far from it. But it does present, in my view, opportunity. And two of the examples I would give, it's been the examples throughout, I think, the governance week so far. One, AI evolution and that revolution. In my mind, there's risk and there's opportunity. There's risk. It's an emergent strategic risk where I think if used irresponsibly, could expose the organization to threats. You have bad actors, you have fraud, financial crime, different things that people use AI for, right? And then, of course, we spoke about the data. that if misused or mishandled could create, varying degrees of risks for organizations. And also, something I think that's more pertinent to the boardroom, the AI feedback, if it's used without proper validation, you can have reliance on incorrect information resulting in poor decision making. But then on the flip side, there's opportunity because especially in my area of AML CFT, agentic AI, varying compliance tools that help to get the work done, right? But you want to make sure that you do not remove the decision-making element or the human element in your processes. And then by extension, again, opportunity, the creation of your governance framework to manage that process and ensure that there's responsible use. Many presenters have mentioned it, the training, the oversight, etc., that would be required. So that's one example. I think example number 2 for me would definitely be the pandemic. We spoke about it, I think, in the panel before. The disruption to business operations. For me, in the capital markets, market risk overall, I mean, that was not a good year. And then technologically, however, those being the risks, from an opportunity perspective, I'm not sure that, we would be able to have, I remember Kamala used to say it all the time, using Zoom as a tool to be able to have all of our sessions and training. Now, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and so on would have existed before, but we weren't as eager to use it because we were accustomed to what we were accustomed to. So again, it presented an opportunity, I think, to us, and perspective is a very important part of how we look at it. All right. So disruption could expose risks. However, if it's done right, risk is an important element of strategy. And I think good governance isn't about protecting the organization from threats. It's also about positioning to capitalize on opportunities. And future-ready boards must manage both downside risk as well as upside opportunity. And how do they do that? Well, strategy. We've talked so much about risk, and risk is an important part of strategy. And how has strategy evolved? Well, disruption has knocked down our probably prior ways of planning, right? We no longer have such longer period outlooks for certainly not for financial institutions in terms of our planning. So we would see that period has shortened. So we'd probably look at a 3-year horizon out in terms of, there's so much uncertainty. But now, and the key term that I've heard throughout this entire session so far, over the last 2.5 days, would be that boards must be able to pivot and have that ability to be flexible while maintaining focus on the goals and the vision and the overall direction of the organization. So those future-ready boards must move from exactly what we've said before, reviewing strategy periodically, to continuously shaping strategy now in response to this changing environment. And I'll say, up until I think it was yesterday, or was it today, we found out about the situation with Methanex, and they're not able to agree the deal with NGC. All of those things have already engaged boards in terms of what does it mean? What do you think? I think it's a lot of what Ian was saying in his discussion before. Anticipating and making decisions, right? So future-ready board, they have to focus on the future rather than the past. There's a lot of learning from the past, but the focus has to be on the future. Continuous scanning of the horizon. I think that was a theme as well with the panel before. And building strategic agility as well as focusing on that long-term value. And of course, encouraging innovation. How can future-ready boards encourage innovation? And innovation, I think we understand it's management's responsibility, but the board must enable, they must challenge, support, and oversee that innovation. They are responsible for creating that environment that fosters the innovation, right? And if it is that we want it to be a success, the innovation has to be aligned to the organization's vision and its strategic direction and objective. So I think to concur with what has already been mentioned, right? Because all of the speakers have said so much. The future boards, they have to challenge the status quo. You have to encourage new ideas. You have to embrace continuous improvement. You have to learn from mistakes. And you do have to reward creativity. Boards need to make sure that they allocate resources, because without resources, innovations, it's just an idea. I have a good idea. Investment in people. Innovation depends on people, not only the technology, to get us to where we need to go. And then governing innovation, we talked about that, the framework for your AI governance, your cybersecurity, your ethics, all of those things are important parts of governing innovation. And I think future-ready boards must understand their role, which is not to generate the next big idea, but to create that environment, and to create that environment with oversight. So for decades, boards have relied on experience to guide their decision-making. Today, I would say experience alone is not enough. The question is no longer, have we seen this before? The question is, how do we govern effectively what we haven't seen before, right? What we haven't experienced before. And I think that cascades directly into what Marsha was saying, that future-ready boards have to have that right skill and competency in order to take their organization forward. And those skills may look different. I think Ian might have been the one that mentioned it before. Those skills might look different, may no longer, and I'm not saying we don't need the accountants and we don't need the lawyers and so on. However, there might be new titles that come into play. The strategic foresight, the crisis leadership, the continuous, all of those things are different types of skills that would be important and necessary for that future-ready board. I would add the ability to get timely and reliable information, building resilience within the organization, all of those things. And the boards that succeed in the future will not necessarily be those with the most experience. I think they will be those with the greatest capacity to learn, adapt, challenge assumptions, and govern confidently through uncertainty. So I will pause there and pass this over to Avia.
Aleema, I think your presentation was very insightful. I liked the analogy that you used of a ship. So we're looking at a future-ready board as a ship. I kind of like how you said strategy determines the destination. Innovation is how we navigate, and oversight is how we stay on course. And you especially said the future is now, and I totally agree with you. And in addition, you said experience alone is not enough. So Marsha, you've had the opportunity of listening to both Marlon and Aleema. So I'm bringing you back in for you to share your thoughts as it relates to how you guys were able to align in most areas, but we pretty much to speak to us and what would a future-ready board look like now as it relates to the contributions Marlon shared and the insights shared by Aleema, and of course your insights. So let's hear it.
Well, I got pretty excited when Aleema was talking, and it made me think about, one of the things that we need to add is that future-ready boards need to look at continuous learning. And that's something I think that the boards now don't do, and that we need to focus on. And so what does that continuous learning look like? And I said it's no longer optional for boards in a world where the disruption is constant. A board that stops learning eventually stops adding value. And that's what I would want to say there. And regular board education. And we're not starting from the simple thing of governance and onboarding. Even beyond that, boards themselves, and Aleema made a statement, right? So the positions on boards may look different. We will always need the accountants, Aleema. That's a given. That will never change in life. Accountants will always be there. But for example, for management, and that's again, even looking at what those skills look like, even for management to provide that oversight, that insight for the boards, it may not be a chief financial officer, it might be a chief value officer, right? So just putting that in there. But the boards themselves need to have an appreciation And so regular board education for me look at things of emerging technologies, cybersecurity and cyber resilience. Because let's be real, when things come to you as a board and you don't understand it, and we know that when some boards don't understand financial statements, that the challenge you have is how are you going to opine? How are you going to give oversight? And with all of the volatility and the issues, that are causing us to have to pivot, I like that word a lot, the board cannot provide proper oversight if the board itself doesn't understand what it's opining on. So geopolitical developments, climate and sustainability, critical, especially for us in the accounting profession when we're looking at climate disclosures. Let's look at a simple thing. I'm going to give a perfect example. IFRS 17, which is, those of you who may not know, is a standard that is relevant for the insurance companies. I know board members who themselves attended classes so they could understand what are the changes in materiality disclosures and the impact on business operations to be able to make the right decisions when the information comes to them from the financial perspective. So you have to, as a board member, be able to operate in the industry. So you need to understand the industry trends. I had I will not say who it is, who said to me, not because you grow avocado and you are on the board of the Agricultural Development Bank, it's not the same thing. So you obviously have to be able, I see Marlon laughing. I'm certain, I don't want to say Marlon, must you have that on your board? But the reality is that you need to, as a board member, you can no longer be selected and sit there. That's what I want to say. When you get onto the board, you as a board member need to take the responsibility, besides your fiduciary responsibility, to understand the industry that you are in, to understand the issues that affect the industry, to be aware. And that means that regular education individually, and dare I say maybe even from the organization, to support the board. So perhaps as management, we have to take the responsibility to provide insight. Maybe part of the board papers becomes something around industry trends today, so that the board is being made aware, so that they are, up to par for the task. Of course, skill-based board refreshment, and I'm going down this road around the education continuous learning, because I think that both Marlon and Aleema spoke highly of, what is required in terms of risk, in terms of appreciating what strategy and innovation. I too liked the example of the ship rudder, the ship metaphor, right? But the next stage, I think, is what's required is what skill set is required. How does the board pivot? How does the board add value? And so that continuous learning should also include skill-based board refreshment. Do we understand, or do we have the digital expertise? Do we have the knowledge in cybersecurity? Do we understand sustainability risk? I'm a big believer that in the Caribbean, we are not appreciative of the climate concerns and the sustainability risk. We're talking maybe from the energy sector. Maybe, I will use Republic Bank that has had that investment in sustainability by bringing a chief sustainability officer, but everybody isn't talking that. We are pushing that as a regulator to ensure, because we're all part of the climate concerns. Without the climate, there's no us. So are there emergent competencies that we need? And when the board appreciates that, the board could also say to management, have we looked at the organizational structure? What are we missing? How do we ensure that we have the right skill sets ourselves, even for the CEO who's coming in? That's the kind of oversight that the board gives. Learning from external perspectives. Future-ready boards don't only rely on management for information. So you can't sit there and tell yourself that everything that management presents is accurate, or that management knows everything, because management doesn't know everything. That's why we have boards. We bring the information to the board for the oversight, for the guidance, for the different perspective, for the fresh perspective, because the persons on the board should be coming actually either from industry or expertise to give guidance. So I always want to suggest that, in boards, we bring in or invite industry experts, technology experts, feedback from customers. The board now has to be able to take the feedback loop. So by getting that feedback loop, it's no longer that I make a decision as a board member. The Future Ready board recognizes that feedback is critical to the advancement of its initiatives, to the impact of what it does. And that's not just in building strategy. Those types of information is what the board uses to say, okay, is this what the customer's saying? What's the stakeholders saying? How are we managing? And I mean, again, I'm talking as a regulator as well. Huh? So clearly, with the increase in regulation, number of standards are coming, number of standards are being, asked to be implemented or adopted. The board has to understand that. It needs to recognize that in a highly regulated, Marlon could talk that in highly regulated markets, you can't sit on the board and not understand what the regulations are about. Nobody's asking you to be an expert in everything. Absolutely not. But what we're asking the boards to do is to have an appreciation, to continuously learn so that they can add better value. I'll stop there. Yes?
Thank you. Thank you, Marsha, for expounding on education and learning and how it's important in terms of strategy, innovation, and oversight for a future-ready board. Marlon, we'll bring you back in to share your thoughts.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to get on.
That's fine.
Unmuted. No, I can't disagree with anything Marsha said, and I agree fully with her that you would always need accountants around. Always need accountants. So don't get rid of us accountants. But the thing that as I've grown over the years in being a director and also being directed, having a board over me, directing me, is that what matters most, and I mentioned it in my presentation, and I should have highlighted it more. Trust is key to everything. Your board needs to be able to trust you, and you need to be able to trust your board, your chairman, and all the other directors that sit around the board. So it's important that we, and trust doesn't just comes up. It comes from this consistent application of telling the truth, being transparent, being, I shouldn't say you use the word telling the truth. I mean, but being transparent in what you're doing is a given. That's a baseline. That you are giving your information is truthful and honest, that you give your board and vice versa. So that is important, and you find that once you have that, everything else seems to fall in place. I always, and the thing is, the relationship that I've had with all my chairs over the years is that if something is going wrong or something is not going right, I let my chairman know before somebody else tells him that this is happening. So you don't try to hide anything from your chairman, and you let them know what is going on. So again, it goes back to this whole question of trust. And sometimes we might, going to what Marsha says, what has helped me over the years as it relates to, because being a director, I sit on the boards of the subsidiaries within the stock exchange group, is that you need to sit on other boards to understand how other people do things. And so as a consequence of being on other boards, be they state-owned enterprises or service organizations, like ICAP, you learn from other people and you see what other people are doing. I learned a lot from my time sitting on the board of Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. I learned so much. And that allowed me to add value to my home board. And I always say, and I like your point too, Marsha, is that this learning process helps you to add value. I always tell people along the way, sometimes my staff who works with me, etc., you're not there because they like you, You're not sitting at your desk because they like you. You're sitting there because you add value. And if you're not adding value, trust me, sooner or later, they're going to find a way to get rid of you. So you have to find a way to be continuously learning so that you could be adding value to the role that you're in, either being a CEO or being a director on a particular board. So those are two things for me. trust and adding value to the situation that you're in. And most importantly, to me too, and I mentioned it, in my presentation, and these things happen as you grow older. Humility is everything. Humility is everything. You do not know everything, nor do you pretend that you know everything. If you don't know, you don't know, and say you don't know. So that's important. You need to be humble, and you need to be willing to learn and accept guidance from people who might have seen more and done more than you have done over the years. And the final thing that falls on from humility is, I always thought, and somebody told me this years ago, if you want to be a good leader, you need to understand how to follow somebody else as well. Leadership skills requires humility, and humility comes from being able to take direction and instruction from someone who might be your leader at a particular point in time. So I'll leave it there for now. You see, I've my slant now is not merely to understand the technical stuff. Technical stuff easy to do. You got ChatGPT, you got Claude, you got all those things that help you understand the technical things. It's values that you bring to a situation that matters most as you grow, as you develop your career with and learning from other people. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Marlon. You kind of segued from the learning and you went into values. I want to thank you for highlighting your 4 pillars: trust, adding value, humility, and learning to be a follower, then a leader. So we're gonna move back to Aleema. Then I'll open up this conversation for those of you who are attending. I notice the chat is beginning to blow up. So we're going to give you a full half an hour. I'm going to let Aleema come in with her thoughts, and then we'll move right into the Q&A, where you can raise your hand so that we would have order. You'll raise your hand. You'll use the little emoji button to the bottom of your screen. Raise your hand and you will be unmuted to speak. But of course, I have a lineup in the chat that I'll start with, and then I'll revert to the others. So Aleema, let's hear what are other analogies you'll leave us with as it relates to strategy, innovation, and oversight on the Future Ready board.
So, Avia, I don't have any more analogies. It just so happened my son was preparing for his grammar test yesterday, and we were talking about analogies, right? So, unfortunately, nothing more there. But I would like to add, to what Marlon has started talking about in terms of values, humility. I cannot agree enough, because sometimes there is a hesitancy by and people generally. Maybe somebody younger might be considered, somebody who they think there's nothing to learn from, or there's nothing that can be shared. And I think in today's day and age, we cannot think that way. I think we have to listen. We have to be open to listening. And information flows in both directions, because the younger people who are exposed to boards or who may sit on boards, they have a lot that they can learn from those with the experience, and vice versa as well. Because those who have all of the experience, like I said, experience alone will not be enough, in my respectful view, to take the organization forward based on the environment that we see. Because Ian talked about not knowing what you don't know. Kamala, what I would say is I also, God rest his soul, had a chairman who would call it 2-story ignorance. You don't know what you don't know. And it was something that was, taught to us, if I would say that from that chair, that, you had to listen. You had to listen in order to learn, and that information can come from varying sources. So it's not only your peers that sits on the board that you would listen to. And I think this area of AI and technology and so on has shown different sides of the equation. From what I've seen there are a lot of people willing to learn, and there are some people that think this is my area of expertise and I will sit in my corner and I will batten my crease based on what I know. But sometimes even that, based on the skill that you bring to the board to be effective, you have to understand how do you contribute? How does that skill contribute to the strategy? And not only, I've had 30 years management experience in law or whatever. If you are in a company that's in financial securities or an FI, you need to know how to apply that knowledge in a way that is necessary for the board in terms of strategy and guiding management. So I think all of that, the qualities together with whatever people bring to the table from an academic perspective, coupled with their experience, that is the mix that I think we're looking for. And even from the perspective of, I don't like to say age, but just we call it experience, right? The maturity, it takes a mix as well. I think you do have to try to find, for the type of organization your size, you have to find that right mix to catapult the organization forward.
Aleema, I think that was brilliant that you highlighted that experience alone is not enough. And I really liked your late chairman that shared with you about the two-story ignorance. You don't know what you don't know. So on that note, I'm sure Kamla will have some feedback or some sentiments she'd like to share. But before Kamla come in, I'd like to give a shout out to Karen Pereira, one of the directors on the board of the CCGI. She's in the room. So thank you for joining, Karen Pereira. Such a pleasure. Over to you, Kamla. And thank you very much, esteemed panelists. And we'll hear more from you once the questions start coming from the chat.
Yes. Thanks, Avia. And I want to say that Karen did a brilliant job this morning. She did such an amazing opening, and I'm happy she's back here with us as we close off today. And I like to shake things up a little bit. So I want to ask this panel something on the basis of, all three of you have given really, really solid contributions. We understand the challenges in getting the Future Ready board, to look at, as Aleema said, so the future is now. So here's the thing that I have been kind of thinking about for a while. A lot of us, and as Aleema said, she don't like to use age. I don't mind, my age. I grew up looking at the cartoon with Dick Tracy with this little thing in his wrist, and we were like all amazed, really? That could happen? You can talk into your wrist? Well, look at where the world is now. And then my daughter introduced me to this cartoon. I think, well, I'm not even sure what to call it. It's called Treasure Planet, I think. One of those very old sci-fi type animated productions from way back when. And when you look at it, there's a whole universe that is a combination of the type of artificial intelligence that we see that is becoming more prevalent in the world today, along with humans. And so you had these cyborgs whose responsibility was law and order. You had, and I'm wondering if all of these past sci-fi type movies, like for instance, I had loved Time Tracks from years ago, where he just had this little thing like a credit card that revealed this hologram that brought the entire world of information to his fingertips. That's where we're going. That's what I see. And can we use those things to guide us and say, this is where the world is going to be? What do our board need to have and to prepare for if we are going to have cyborgs that's going to be patrolling the streets? Each of us are going to have our own personal hologram, which is kind of already what's in our smartphones, with the world at our fingertips. And basically, soon, like the Jetsons, being able to jump on a little spacecraft and move around and fly around the air. Does it help? Does it help having these types of fictional depictions that appear to now be what our world is coming to? Okay. Everyone.
Which one of you is I see Aleema laughing, but
I think
Marsha's gonna go first. Yes.
Well, I wasn't going to because I don't want to give away my age, right? So I'm thinking how do the Jetsons, You know, you're talking, Kamala, and I'm thinking, my God, is she going to bring up the Jetsons? And there you go, there you have it, right? So I'm going to say being the youngest on this panel. Um, so I guess, Kamala, your question really to us is, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting it right. So those shows, the Jetsons, I mean, I think we're living closer to the Jetsons than we probably know. And all of those shows depict a world that we could not even have imagined at that time that seems to be fast pacing now, right? And so, with the onslaught of what seems to be a coming reality, what is it that the boards need to do to thrive in that new environment? I think that's the question you're asking us. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So, the first thing is, I think that the board needs to understand what those AI technologies, how it's transforming, relevant for just generally, and also to its specific industry. And I'm going to use ICAT as an example, right? ICAT is a regulated, it's a professional accounting organization that belongs to the global body. And globally, we're looking at what does 2035 look like? And I said that before. And so how does the AI or how does technology, how do emerging technologies impact our industry? Not just the accounting profession, but the professional accounting organizations that exist, which are the drivers and enablers of the profession in their respective territories. So what does a council or board need to know? It needs to understand, as I said before, how those technologies impact the industry that you're in, that could impact the performance, the longevity, the sustainability, the financial, and the resources of your respective organization in that industry. The other thing the boards need to do, which I think needs to be done, even though it may not be being done from the government level, and I'm saying it that way, is that you need to have an AI governance framework, right? So you're not running down the road to just input or implement technology into your organization. There needs to be a framework. I'm a big believer in the use of the Claude Perplexity. I mean, I don't even have a notebook. I use an iPad to write everything. So I'm a big believer in technology. And so, but the question is, how do you, like I said just today to one of my managers, because she said, Claude gave me the answer. I said, remember, Claude gives you the answer, but you must not become over-reliant on Claude. So how are we now as boards ensuring as the organizations move towards using the technology? Because it's going to be, I guess, a beam me up Scotty, and there's going to need to be a framework as to how are you beaming up. That's the reality, right? The second thing I would say to that is that, and I'll use the big four firms, for example, that all have some type of, you'll see like PwC is joining with Anthropic. You'll see that Microsoft Copilot is embedded in a lot of the big four firms. However, there is a lot of framework around that. There's a lot of governance around that. There's a lot of structure around that. In fact, for a long time, the big four firms, if it doesn't exist still, didn't even allow for Facebook. PwC invented its own Facebook called PwC Spark to be able to manage how the technology was moving and to manage what was happening, right? So what boards will have to do to be future ready is to understand the trends that are happening, understand the impact of those trends to the respective industry and the organizations, to see where they could fit as they develop. Aleema said it, as you develop strategy, your strategy considers that emerging technology, but the strategy allows you now to develop the initiatives which will include under your governance framework. How are you managing? How are you protecting? How are you enhancing? How are you impacting your business? And of course, for all of the stakeholders that can be affected. That's where I'll say is my answer to your question, Kamala.
Thank you, Marsha. And of course, I didn't remember the beam me up Scotty part, but I think as you advise, it really helps to anchor your minds as to how do you build that framework? What are you building it for? How are you going to accommodate the kinds of changes that's, I see Derek is saying is actually present. So I'd let Avia take that in terms of including our participants from the chat and the participants.
Yeah. So thank you, Kamala, for spicing things up a bit. I noticed in the chat, I'm going to invite, I think it's Louis Kinley, to unmute yourself and to share. There was a note that he sent especially to Marsha. It would be nice if we can hear your voice and connect with you, and you can share the sentiments in the chat. That would be nice. You can go ahead and unmute
thank
yourself.
you all. I was actually fortunate enough to have the opportunity to moderate one of the panels yesterday, and I know one of the big topics across both of the afternoon panels was trust, and at the same time, knowing that there is often a need to go beyond just the board pack that you get, and to get that outside information. So sometimes that's from within the organization, sometimes it's external, but how do you suggest people actually keep learning and staying on top of things, and what sources are actually helpful? Because you can bring in PwC, you can bring in an expert, right? But you can't, that's not really educating yourself. That's you've bought a fish, not learned to fish. So how do folks learn to fish a little bit out here?
Thank you. Who's going to take that?
I think
Aleema,
I talk a lot. I'm giving that to Aleema.
Yes, Aleema, you got
Lucky for me,
voluntold.
Lucky for me, I am part of the ACCA, so I have lots of resources for additional learning and continuous professional development. So I would say, it's useful if you have a professional qualification, or professional body that you are assigned to, right? In which case, I told my husband, I think just 2 days ago, you learn or you die in terms of, he's a CFA charter holder. I said, listen, I don't know what you guys do or what you all have for additional learning and so on, but I can tell you, I check my ACCA resources every month. I get emails and I look at the information. And there's so much information on every area: risk, governance, ethics, you name it. AI, I've been able to learn so much from that platform. And what I would say, even if, so let's say you're not part of that type of institution or professional grouping, there are lots of other ways. The CCGI, definitely, I have to say, is one if you're a director. And there are lots of free, I remember a couple of years ago, PwC did some work for us. And one of the gentlemen who's now a partner there, we spoke about the University of Google in terms of, LinkedIn learning. There's everything out there now. What I would caution for directors especially, I mean, there is a high level of responsibility attached to your decision making. Please look to credible sources for your learning. And sometimes, as much as we've gotten accustomed to videos and listening, sometimes there's no substitute for reading. Because a lot of the materials in terms of the frameworks have been put out by, I know, the OECD. I would have looked at some of the governance frameworks from the OECD. There's no substitute for reading sometimes. And if you are in this area, you are going to have to do the work. That's just the way I see it in terms of what I would recommend for learning.
Yeah. Wonderful. Excellent. You learn or you die.
Yeah.
Yes.
Support Aleema. I do agree. Reading is one of the things I do, and as you rightly said, technology helps me. I like to use Audible and read books nonstop. I'm 19. I think about 17 hours away from being a master. So I've gone through all the newbie, this stage and all. So I just have 17, 18 more hours to become a master. Right now I'm at the scholarship level. And I read books on almost any and everything. A book that I'm reading now, listening to now is the Supreme Court judgments between 1969 to 74, 75. And you would think, well, what was the U.S. Supreme Court decisions and process in that? Why are you that? It helps you to understand the thinking process, how these people come up and make the decision, all the lobbying and horse trading that go around for a 5-4 majority or 4-5. It is amazing. The other day, I listened to a book on a meeting held at Camp David between Nixon and his his main advisors when they move from the gold standard to the dollar standard and the implications of that. So you just read, and sometimes you might think that these things don't apply, but sometimes you sit down in a meeting and something comes, and the situation comes down, and you say, well, I remember something that happened that I read in this particular book. I'm reading a book by Edward Said on Orientalism, and this is to do with the whole colonial and post-colonial era, and how Europeans saw us as being so different and so backward. So you just read and read and read and listen, and then even at work, I find for me to really understand things, I listen to it and I see the words on the screen in front of me, and it sticks in my head like crazy. It don't come up. It don't move from my head. So I agree with you, Aleema. Take the time to read and understand. And one of the things too I like to do is, after coming from church on Sunday evening, Sunday morning, I sit down and watch all kind of YouTube university lectures and all kind of crazy stuff on topics that might not mean anything to you now, but at some point in the future, I remember such and such, and it comes back to you. It comes back to you. So I support this whole question of reading, and you use the technology to read to help you read and understand things as well. So I leave it there. So
thank you so much, Marlon.
Let me just jump in here, because I think that this question was a very, very good one. And I think one of the things we don't talk about is that boards are about leadership, right? And that as leaders, you should also be looking at how you improve your leadership skills. And so there are many things or many places that you can go. I'm a big believer of reading. I'm trying to finish chapter 2 of The Art of War, right? So, I mean, but that's a big book for all leaders, right? But the thing is, you can go as a board member to do your own leadership course. There's INSEAD. I mean, I hear Aleema, she has to plug ACC. ACC is our JS partner, but there are courses at ICAT. There is courses, that you can do, short courses on leadership, right? There is Harvard, if you can't afford, there is Arthur Lockjack, there is governance courses you can do, but you want to do courses that help you to lead better. There's crisis leadership. I mentioned around understanding your environment, meaning that if it is like, for example, IFRS 17, you're in the insurance industry, you need to understand, etc. Right? And so you probably could have done a course at ICAT with IFRS 17. It may be technical, but you may have an appreciation for what it means. But I really want to stress around leadership, which is what Aleema and Marlon are also stressing. When you're an avid reader, there's a big thing about that, right? 30 minutes to an hour a day, 10 pages every day. Why? I'm a lover. I walk on the walking pad and put on my audiobook. Sometimes you can't stop to read. But what it means is that you are also allowing yourself to learn. And when you learn, when you come into a boardroom, because there's so many things happening, right? The people are coming into the room. I just saw somebody mention about ChatGPT in the chat that we have here. They're also Googling, and you have to be aware. You need to learn, you need to get information, you need to bring that information to bear. And in this changing world, you don't know when it's going to be called upon you. So I want to say that as a board member, you need to be looking at leadership as well.
Wonderful.
I hope you answer your question, eh?
Where the time just seemed to be creeping away from us, and we're having such a rich experience this afternoon. I just wanted to spotlight a few of the sentiments in the chat. So I think Christina Jagdeo was saying humility is indeed everything. She also said we do not know everything, which we all agree. Yes. And Derek Lockpat said something very profound: humility over ego. And that's quite evident in the room this evening. We have Ulrich Miller, an expert with no ethical principles leads to corruption and fraud. Yes. I should repeat that. An expert with no ethical principles leads to corruption and fraud. And I think we can definitely relate to some of the disruptions we had in the past, like the financial crisis. And I think that quote aligns perfectly with that example. And then, Derek, would you like to unmute yourself to share your thoughts? We'd love to hear from you. And I'd like to hear it in your tone.
And as Derek unmutes, I just want to remind everyone that the link is put in the survey. I did hear 1 or 2 people leave. Before you leave today, please click on that link and give us your feedback for this wonderful panel so we could share your great feedback with them as well. Sorry about that, Derek. You can go ahead
Oh,
now.
no problem at all. No, first of all, fantastic panel. I couldn't stop nodding and relating, but everything you've said, of course, applies to now. I've had a mixed experience being accountable to boards as well as being on boards and chairing boards. And there's so much to do. And I'll just give a little 2 cents. One of the things that we, in a particular board that I served on for 15 years, we experienced the cost and the impact of bringing on or selecting board members that didn't work out. I mean, we didn't know that they weren't going to work out. So after a couple of years of that, what we did is that we adjusted our bylaws to require that any prospective board member must first serve on a subcommittee. And after, of course, meeting specific criteria that is required. And then after a period, I think of 2 years, we would see if they're really committed to serving the organization. And that has made the world of difference. So just wanted to add that little bit of value to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. I noticed there's, Louis said, thanks for these reminders. So you're saying, unlike ChatGPT, we shouldn't count Reddit, YouTube, and other social feeds as valid sources of up-to-date information?
And I would agree in some respects, sorry, go ahead, Aleema.
I was going to say it depends, right? It depends on the nature of the area. And you have to, based on your fiduciary duty, you have to look at what you consider to be the most credible source, based on, your responsibility and what you have to oversee. I don't know what you get from Reddit, but if it's enough and it's sufficient, then go for it. But I would just say it depends. It depends on the context of what is the nature of the matter you're looking at.
Thank you very much for that.
There's some YouTube channels that I absolutely love. There's one called Cold Fusion. A young man from Australia does brilliant work. So there's a lot that you can look at. And I guess Reddit does give some people provocative thoughts. And so there's value. But I agree with you 100%, Aleema, in terms of your preparation for the boardroom. You also want to get into some serious areas of learning as well.
Brilliant. Joining also in the room this afternoon is another director from the CCGI, Dr. Charlene Sharp, and she has dropped some comments in the chat. I'll invite her now to speak. I haven't heard her voice in a while, so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. And I hope you're in a position that you can speak, Charlene.
Of course.
Yes, and Charlene, we have 5 minutes to end, so yeah,
yes.
Of course, you're putting me on the spot, but I was just listening to today was just excellent. Yesterday was excellent. The day before was excellent. I'm just in this excellence world. But I'm just listening to the reading, and I'm at a university, and we're having a challenge with us getting persons to read. If you want to hide anything, put it in a book, because nobody's going to see it. But then I'm thinking, again, aging myself, we had this sitcom, It's a Different World from where we're coming from. And I'm saying what we are now producing is based on our knowledge. Are we able to think beyond? I heard somebody spoke about 2035. Can we go to 2050? Are we able to think beyond our present realities? And is it that our books are failing us in getting our imaginations just going? Because with what is happening in this volatile world, what we now know is not going to be enough to take us over.
You could not have said it better, Charlene. I just want to issue another clarion call for you to the link for the feedback survey. That's how CCGI is able to improve on its deliverables and be able to curate special programs and courses that are relevant for our Future Ready board. So we'll love for you to complete the survey in the chat. And I really like, I'm going to come around for our closing remarks. I would like for you to tell us, what is your ideal Future Ready board? And what does that looks like 2035 or 2050? What would that look like?
Marsha, you're trying to figure that out. You've been telling us that. What kind of conclusion you came to?
Oh my God, that's
like
a very, very, very good question. I think a future ready board is one where the folks on the board members thoroughly understand their rules. I want to start from that. Yeah, I think we have a lot of boards now that, people on boards and they don't necessarily understand the role of the board. And that's a first start. You understand your role and what that role encompasses. And that's not just, that's your fiduciary responsibility. That's your ability to provide an oversight. The Future Ready board is using technology and using information. I think Louis asked that question, what other information? So not just a management report, not just a CEO report. The Future Ready board is looking at industry analysis. It's looking at forward future trends. It actually has its technology doing a kind of plug as what does the future look like for us? Plugging in the numbers. It's data conscious.
Like that.
And it also, dare I say it, it works collaboratively with management for the success of the organization. And I want to say that because I think sometimes boards are not, we're not looking at it from the perspective of how are we providing oversight. I quite appreciate my board, I must say. I've seen all kinds of boards. And, I think that when you have a board that you go to as management and that you are able to collaborate to get oversight, to come to some kind of a final position that leads the organization in its strategic direction more powerfully. So what you have is a board that is a powerhouse of oversight, of information.
I'm not hearing Marsha. Is it me alone?
No, I'm hearing Marsha very well. You may need to... We're hearing her. Marlon, are you hearing Marsha?
Yes, I am.
What about you, Aleema?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Sorry to interject.
We will give you from the Jetsons and send it to you, right? So, right? But what and I think what we want are boards that recognize and become powerhouses of oversight and strategic intent. And what that means is that the skill sets on the boards, and I'm going to step further. The Future Ready board is also that when those board members are selected, and I think it was Derek that mentioned that, right? So the whole thing of when they are selected, they are also selected, and let us also be realistic, all our boards, especially state entities, so it's easier, NGOs, it's easier, maybe private sector, but even for the state entities and those that have government stakeholders, major shareholders, that even from that aspect, what we have are selection of board directors based on what is required so that the organization can move forward. That for me would be one of the biggest things.
Thank you so much. What I really liked, you said Future Ready boards should be powerhouses of oversight and strategic insight.
Yes.
Moving along to Marlon, your final thoughts, and then to Aleema. Marlon, we're going to give you 45 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not going to stay long. What I was going to say is that a future ready board does not, wait for something for a crisis to occur. They're continuously scoping the horizon and looking to see what's out there, what can affect us, what's affecting a particular industry that may have a ripple effect on our industry. So there's that constant need to be out there forward looking and trying to understand what's going on. And as we've reinforced, it only comes from continuous learning and understanding what is developing and making sure that we are ready for the event, for things. Don't let it surprise us, so to speak. And that's it. I'm done.
Thank you, Marlon. So what you're saying is that we don't wait for crisis. We're more proactive. Or
Yeah.
We're not being defensive, we're being proactive. And Aleema, let's hear from you.
So I would say that the Future Ready board would be one that anticipates change. They guide strategy, they enable responsible innovation, and they exercise that effective oversight in this increasingly complex and uncertain world. I think that future-ready boards, they should not or they do not fear disruption. They prepare for it, they learn from it, and they harness it as a catalyst for long-term value creation. And
You
that's
could not
where
have
I
said
would
it
leave
better. You could not have said it better. I'd like to thank you, esteemed panelists, for your rich contributions to this afternoon's panel. And I made tons of notes. I have pages and pages of notes from all of you. So thank you for enhancing my learning and closing my knowledge gap this afternoon. And I'm sure many of us in the room can share those sentiments. And you can see from the emojis coming up on the screen, there are lots of cheers. Please remember to complete the survey. And I now hand you back to Master Control. It was a pleasure being your moderator this afternoon. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Avia. And yes, please, let's give that feedback via the very formal process of our survey, which Monique has put the link in the chat for you. I want to add my appreciation and endorse what Avia said. This has been such a fabulous panel. Thank you all so much for your contribution. We have crossed the time for this evening for us to end, and so I'm not going to take too long and wrap up, other than to say, Marsha, at that point you made about needed to have our state boards be properly equipped with people who should be there. We're dealing with that tomorrow.
Nice.
We're going to have a presentation from Jamaica, which I want to encourage everyone. Please do not miss. We all talk about the state sector and the need for directors of state enterprises to be able to really assist in carrying out the responsibilities of their state enterprise. But a huge problem is directors who are selected not fit for their boards. We're dealing with that issue first thing in the morning. So we look forward to having you tomorrow as we move to the governance of the state sector. We thank everyone, Karen in her absence, such a brilliant presentation this morning, and all of our panelists and moderators for today. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Control, let's end with our sponsors video so that we give them appropriate exposure. Thank you. And that was the music of Joshua Regrello, really talented young panelist who graciously shared his music for us that we can use it to serenade our sponsors. Thank you all very much for a truly, truly wonderful day 2 of Governance Week 2026.